Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Andrews. I direct the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William and Mary Law School, and we've been working with the Virginia chapter of the APA and Wetlands Watch in a partnership to produce these lunchtime webinars, this series about different climate change impacts and issues. So we hope you enjoyed the last one in June. And today we're so privileged to have DEQ Director Mike Rolband with us. As many of you all know, he joined DEQ in January of 2022. Fairly recently, but he has been around the stormwater and wetlands world for a long time. He founded Wetland Studies and Solutions Incorporated in 1991, and he grew that company into a multidisciplinary natural and cultural resources consulting firm with a staff of more than 200. He's I'm going to read off all your initials, Mike, a PE, a PWD, a PWS Emeritus, and lead AP. His firm constructed the first LEED Gold facility in Virginia and used multiple LID practices for stormwater management in 2005. He's known as an expert on stormwater management, wetlands impacts, the Clean Water Act, Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, local environmental regulations. Ask him about the Rolband Amendment to the stormwater law. He'll tell you about that. He has testified before the General Assembly and lectured to numerous organizations on stormwater management and mitigation, wetlands and stream regulatory policy, and the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act regulations. He was instrumental in developing Virginia's new wetlands laws in 2000, and he served on the technical advisory committee that developed the subsequent regulations. And he was also involved in developing the new stormwater regulations and the energy balance method of stormwater quantity control. He's the first one I called when tasked by the General Assembly with forming a stakeholders group to look at rural localities' concerns about stormwater management, because he is the pro and he was so helpful. So he's also established the nonprofit Wetland Research Initiative in 2007 to fund applied research in wetlands creation, restoration, and enforcement activities. And he's a professor of the practice, Professor Rolband at Cornell. He was doing that before he took this job. So thank you again for joining us today. And thank you for taking the time to speak with us about climate change impacts and upcoming changes that may be happening to stormwater and ENS, et cetera.
Well, thank you very much. I'm incredibly embarrassed, Elizabeth, but I appreciate the introduction. I'm going to share screen and get my presentation up. And 1 second here. There, can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
So today I was going to talk about our program called PEEP, the Permit Enhancement and Evaluation Platform. And I'm also going to talk about stormwater management efforts. They definitely are linked, and I think it'll hopefully improve a lot of things that DEQ is doing. There's a big focus, obviously, on getting permits out more efficiently, and that's where PEEP is oriented to. And then we have a big initiative in stormwater management that ties in definitely to what the Institute is studying. And they're actually related as well. So feel free to interrupt me. I know, I believe Ross is monitoring the chat. If there's any questions, obviously I'll leave time at the end as well. But first we'll talk about PEEP. So first I had to have an acronym just because I feel I'm going to join the government after 40 years of private sector work. But my daughter likes PEEPs, and that kind of started this. But what I want to do is identify and implement technological ways to have a better permitting process. So I want to improve our transparency, the efficiency of how DEQ does things, and collaboration with both other stakeholder groups, the permittees, and the other regulatory agencies. The concept is very simple: developing a schedule. And when I say it's very simple, because my whole career I retired and decided to become the director of DEQ, or asked to be the director of DEQ, and I wanted to take some business processes that I've used in my entire career and apply it to the regulatory program from a different side. So the concept is simply create a critical path, or create a schedule that we can then follow the critical path and track the approval process so that everybody that's involved can see where we stand. And hopefully, as we do that, number one, figure out a better way to do things, potentially combining steps or changing the order of steps or doing more things concurrently, and then give accountability so everyone can see where we stand. So we are now actually running, this is the first screen here of PEEP, for the wetlands program. So we're going to apply this to every program at DEQ. I obviously started with the wetlands program for a couple of reasons. One, I'm familiar with it, but number two, it actually deals with the most number of outside agencies. So it was the most complicated one for the IT staff to actually pull together and make it work. So our thought process was we'll tackle the hardest one first. And then if we can get that one to work, we'll now apply it to the other ones. So right now we're running in a beta version internally only. Our goal is to get all the bugs worked out in the next 4 months and then make it public in January. So the screen, for example, we're going to add a couple of more pieces to it now that we're using it for a couple of weeks. We started putting data in it July 1st and started using it August 1st. But this screen, first of all, is a map, and it shows you a dot for every permit that is being reviewed as of July 1st. And then you can search, by facility name, county, owner name. We're going to add permit number and an agent as well. Or you can click on a dot, hover on a dot. It'll come up with, more detailed information. Then you can click on that. The search, columns right now you see on the page are basically the input to the database, and it's linking to our current KEDS database system. When you click on for detail, this is an example of a permit that we were using test data for that you would see, and you can actually hover on some of them and get more detail. But the key is where the gray is a schedule. That was our goal, okay? And then the different color codes are for like DEQ in this case, DHR and the Army Corps, and then the applicant. So for example, for the applicant complete for review, okay, DEQ had it for a little bit. It went back to the app, it was incomplete. It came back and it was complete. And then you'll see we were a little slow in getting it from complete to starting the next step with federal coordination and BDHR coordination. But the concept here is tracking that to a schedule so everyone sees a target schedule. And then if there's a problem, we can see where the problem is. Either it's the applicant is not responding, or the agent, or the one of the agencies hasn't responded. And we'll have more detail behind this that's available internally where we can figure out exactly who's working on that project. There's also details, decision details that on this snapshot here is clipped on the bottom left, where you can see, and we can click on and get even more detail as to what's going on, where is it? And then, like I say, internally, we'll be able to find out not only where is it, but who has it. And then we're tracking processing days. So our goal is, number one, transparency. Number two, process improvement. So as we develop these schedules, we're finding that we could make more things go concurrently and hopefully squeeze up that time frame. And then accountability, basically find out what's going on. Sometimes we found already that DEQ is holding up the show. On another case the other day on Friday, an applicant called. I was able to just pull it up, and actually had gone to his agent, and it's been there for 29 days. So they were missing one thing in the application. We sent it back for them to finish it, and they haven't had time. The applicant actually didn't know that it was still sitting at his agent. He had been told it was DEQ holding it up. So I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. I'm trying to point fingers at everybody in terms of everybody has to be accountable for their actions. We're going to work together to get permits processed faster. Now, it may be a yes, it may be a no. And that's another thing that maybe we're changing a little culture, that when something comes in that's incomplete, for example, we're not working on it. It's going to go back till it's complete so we can be more efficient and use that limited manpower we have to their maximum efficiency level. So skipping from PEEP, the first program, of course, that we are running it in is stormwater, wetlands. The next program we'll be running it in is stormwater. And then after that is mitigation banking, and then we're moving to some air permits. But on stormwater, we have a lot of issues with efficiencies that we're working on at the same time. So the PEEP process is actually, for our stormwater plan review, is relatively simple because it comes to DEQ and there's no other agency involved. But there's a whole bunch of things and problems that we have that have slowed the process up that I'm going to talk about. The first thing, obviously, is one comprehensive manual. So, and then secondly, providing training and certification to reduce the review time. So this slide kind of gives you a picture. On the left side is every manual that we deal with in the stormwater program. Even the Chesapeake Bay manual has a section on stormwater that we still use, believe it or not. The famous green book from 1992, the erosion control handbook, the blue books that are from 99. Then we have the LID clearinghouse, the BMP clearinghouse rather, that has a 2011 publication date with the draft in 2013 that was never finalized. And then an amazing amount of technical bulletins and guidance documents and regulations. So this is not workable. It's 23 inches tall of paper, and the vast majority of people can't read it all and comprehend it and remember what applies. What I'm trying to do is bring us all together, have one integrated stormwater handbook. Our goal is to be the best in the class. I'm talking about, I want to have the best stormwater handbook there is, at least in the United States, if not the world. So to do that, we're going to update and consolidate information. We've got to have a document that can be continually updated. So I don't want it to go out of date. The fact that we're using 30-year-old manuals is just not good. We want to have 2023 Stormwater Handbook. Our goal is to finish it by the end of 2023. And I want to have a handbook that not only reflects the best that everybody in the industry knows now, but I want to have a process so it's continually updated. It'll live online. Obviously, some people like me like hard copies. So we're going to work on a way to have a hard copy as well. But the most critical thing is we want to have a process that keeps it updated for new products, new techniques, different storm intensity requirements, for example, that as the climate changes, the intensities are changing on our storms. So we need to have an easy way to update all that information. So to do that, we have a stakeholders advisory group. There's roughly 60-something people in it. So it's a very large group, not quite as large as the solar SAG, which is I think 80 plus. But we basically let anyone that was interested, that has some technical ability and knowledge, get on this group, because we want to bring ideas from everywhere. We also are in the process of hiring a consulting firm to actually prepare the handbook. And that firm, the intent to award was announced on Thursday night. So we've already gone through the RFP process. We've selected a company, and hopefully going through this administrative procedures process, that group will be under contract next week and can start working, full power on getting this handbook together. So the idea is that we have the stakeholders group. The group comes together, and at least monthly, they've had 2 meetings. We'll have at least 10 more, and bring information to us and to the consultant as to best ways to do this. What do they see around the world in their company in different parts of the country? What do they see for new products, and how to get it all together? I think it's just going to be incredibly powerful to have this one handbook. Maybe I should have jumped ahead yet. The other aspect of this process is that, I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. It's going to streamline everything. We want to take, for example, the annual standards and specs that were out there, that were started originally to streamline things, because things that were being done, that were in our current handbooks didn't apply to a lot of different industry practices, or industry like a utility line, for example. There weren't standards for that. So that industry created their standards. Well, now we have like 6 different standards, or plus or minus, for a pipeline installation, be it a sewer line, a gas line, a water line, whatever. It's still a pipeline, and it doesn't matter what company builds it, or what service authority or utility is building that facility. It's the same thing. So we shouldn't have multiple standards. So I want to get all the standards that are in the annual standards, again, integrated into this new handbook. I want to get rid of it all possible waivers and exceptions and exemptions. I mean, there's one that I've heard about a few times. We're holding up a sewer project in the Hampton Roads area, I think it was, because they hadn't heard back from an approval to waive the 500-foot per day restriction in installing the sewer line. Well, turns out DEQ has never not approved that. So my question is, why then for 30 years do we have this waiver process? And I was explaining to me there used to be a DCR, and we're following what DCR did when they gave it to us when we took over in 2014. And it's like, okay, that's not a good reason. What do we do? Well, we don't do anything. It's just, we just approve them. So then if we're not thinking, we're not reviewing, let's just put it in the manual as a standard thing and not burn up staff time and delay projects without value. So the key there is we want to protect the environment. We only want to do things that add value, that add protection, not things that just slow things down, but don't actually improve anything. So that's the goal of one stormwater management manual. Okay, now in the meantime, we're taking several intermittent steps. And so there's several different guidance documents that are in process. One of them you've probably seen, or well, hopefully the first two you've definitely seen. We're in public comment right now on stormwater design guidelines. And what I've found out is that as DEQ reviews stormwater plans in 55 localities or 455 localities, the others obviously do it themselves, we have incredible time delays on the DEQ side. And one of the issues that has come up was that applicants who continually complain to me have said that they're not sure what they're supposed to do when they submit a plan. That they haven't gotten clear guidance as to what is required. And then they said it changes. And all their guidance they get is verbal. So the first thing we did is we took a while, but we DEQ staff wrote down roughly 50 pages guidelines as to what they expect to see in a stormwater manual, in a stormwater plan. Now, obviously, these guidelines are all referring to existing regulations or existing manuals, and there's some issues with people saying we can't use these manuals. Well, the current regs refer to these other manuals, so we can't use them. But the key is to put it in one place what DEQ expects when they get a plan set. The second thing related to that is we're providing a cover sheet with a checklist. And what this checklist does is it lists everything that we expect to be in a stormwater plan set. And by putting it all down a list and having a box where you fill out what plan sheet to look at for each one of these things, then DEQ staff can do a quick review for completeness. I'm hopeful, and hopefully the design submission professionals that are involved in preparing these and the owners and the agencies that are preparing these or applying for these permits will actually look at this and use this as their own quality assurance, quality control methodology. So these plans will come in with this cover sheet that has this checklist on it, and our staff will review it for completeness within 15 days. That's our schedule. If it's not complete, they'll send it back. They're not going to review it. Send it back, and they'll tell you items 7, 9, and 14 are incomplete. Please complete them and resubmit. That's the essence of the stormwater design guidelines. So number one, communicating clearly exactly what DEQ staff is looking for. And then number two, using that cover sheet that comes with it as that QA/QC process control. Now, the second guidance document that is also out, so they both were published August 1st with a 30-day public comment period, is a streamlined stormwater plan review process. So number one, we're faced with a problem that DEQ is holding up lots of projects in the stormwater area. Number two, we don't have sufficient staff to review them. And that's the fundamental reason why we're very behind. Number three, of course, is that we're getting incomplete plan submissions. So we're sending them back several times. Some applicants have complained to me, they've had 6 and 8 and 9 submissions. Well, that's not good at all. So hopefully, number one, we'll have this quality assurance process that gets things complete. But number two, we're saying, okay, if you submit a complete plan set and the owner certifies it, because there's some things that the owner is supposed to do that historically we've had problems having them do it, or they say they weren't aware that they were supposed to do things like getting a wetlands permit was one of them. Or doing the BMP maintenance. Number two, the professional that's responsible for preparing that plan. So typically a PE, it can also be, I believe, a lot of these can be done by a Class B surveyor. Maybe there's some other professionals I think they are qualified or allowed to submit some of these. And then also a dual combined administrator, so a DCA. That is a DEQ certification. It exists right now. There's 400 and something of them in the state. 120 or so were private sector employees at the moment. Those classes are available at DEQ. You can sign up to take the classes. It takes about 95 man hours in total to get all the classes and take a test, and you get certified. So that group are certified in terms of they've had training as to what is required by DEQ for stormwater and erosion control. You have all three signatures and you've gone through the 15-day completeness, we have a 60-day audit period. During that audit period, DEQ will or will not review the plan. They're going to prioritize the plan review based on their workload, number one, and the level of risk. So for example, a high risk plan would be defined as a large site, greater than 50 acres, more than 25% impervious cover, and more than 25% highly erodible soils. If it has all those three things, it's the highest risk type of project. So the odds of being audited are pretty darn strong. But if it's a little tiny 2-acre site with almost 5% impervious and no highly erodible soils, that's a very, very low risk site. So the odds are it will not be reviewed. It could be, but it likely not be. So if we don't audit it during that 60-day period, the plan set will be automatically approved. So the idea is that 75 days, the majority of the plans can be approved, assuming that was a complete submission. Now, to enforce that, number one, during that 15-day process of completeness, we're going to have a 5 strikes or you're out policy. So if you haven't done it, if we have problems 5 times in a row, you lose your DCA, your dual combined administrative certification. You can get it back if you take the classes again and you take the test and pass it again. For the PEs, all we do is report you to DPOR, and DPOR will hopefully do something. I'm assuming they'll make you take a class, either on how to do this or an ethics class, one or the other, but it's up to them what they do. Now, after you've gotten through that completeness check, we're doing 3 strikes and you're out for the actual plan. So hopefully when we do audit it, there's no major issues. We can approve the plan, might be a note or something, but it's an approvable plan. If we have to send it back for a redo, that's a strike. You get 3 strikes and you're out, same penalty. DCAs have to take the tests, take all the classes and the test again. DPOR, we just, the PEs and other registered professionals, we give you back to DPOR and tell them, hey, they submitted, 3 times they submitted incomplete plans that didn't meet our minimal requirements. Here's why. And we'd like you to make them do something to offset their educational deficiencies. So those 2 documents are out there for public comment. I'm hopeful that we won't have too many bad comments, that we can then respond to public comment and get it approved. Worst case, we have to go back out to public comment again. But they're a way to improve, communicate more clearly what DEQ wants from plans, and get a process down that can get plans approved fast. Now, the third guidance document is the Virginia runoff reduction method or model. And that's how we calculate the stormwater management requirements. And that was calibrated with the Chesapeake Bay model in 2010. It has not been calibrated since, and the model has had many changes. So right now we signed a contract with Virginia Tech, and they are reviewing the VRM and the new Chesapeake Bay model, both CAS 19 and 21, and they are going to revise it so that it is recalibrated with the current model. The other component of that is what is the target pollutant load, and that was developed based on projected land use trends and information from the Bay model back in 2010. Both have changed. So EPA is working on that, and Virginia Tech may or may not have to help get that over the finish line. We'll see what happens, but that's just a one cell input in this Virginia runoff reduction method. So hopefully we'll get that soon, that target number, but that doesn't change the process. They've started now. They're working already at Virginia Tech, and hopefully by next spring we'll have a new version of VRM done with a new target number. My hunch is that you'll see the target number go down, but you'll also see the loads from different land uses like impervious cover go down as well. Based on the CAS 19 and 21 numbers, the impervious cover pollutant load is much, much lower than we were using Tom Schuler's simple method back in 2010. So that's in process, but again, it's something that is integrally related with stormwater management. A lot of it is because there's improvements from the Clean Air Act, by the way, which is making the water cleaner. On the other hand, there's intensity changes from climate change that is changing the runoff characteristics that the Bay model has accounted for that we didn't yet incorporate into VRM. And I should have mentioned, related to all that is another ongoing effort with another SAG, and that is related to consolidation of the erosion control and stormwater management regulations. Back in 2016, the General Assembly directed DEQ to consolidate these two regulations. There's an amazing amount of overlap, just like in the manuals. That process started in 2016 or so, and in 2019 it was still ongoing, and then in 2020 the COVID crisis hit and it sort of stopped meeting. So we've rejuvenated that. They've had one meeting, they're getting ready to have another meeting, and their goal is to get it all done this year so it can go to the March State Water Control Board hearing to get a final approved, so we have one consolidated regulation. And the big plan is that we have a new manual. Well, we have all these new speed up, streamlined processes. We have a new runoff reduction method and a construction general permit that ties in all that. That's a federally delegated thing that expires in July 1st, 2024. So I want to get everything done, all wrapped up with a beautiful bow tie, and everything implemented July 1st, 2024. Lots of streamlining. Now, there's a couple other guidance documents out there. The one that also pertains to stormwater is farms and agribusiness, and that one we've started it. There's a lot of stormwater issues here in this area. We haven't really spent a lot of time working on it simply because we have a limited number of staff, and what I just outlined to you is taking all their bandwidth. And I realize I just already skipped on stormwater guidance, so I guess I don't have to talk about that since I already gave you all those details. And also in the stormwater guidance, I should mention redevelopment. And we're suggesting this, that brownfields and reclaimed coal fields should be or could be defined as redevelopment instead of new development. So right now, the way people are interpreting it, those areas, if you want to build something on a brownfield, like say a solar project, that's new development. We are proposing that be defined as redevelopment, which reduces the water quality improvement requirements significantly. And again, we're just trying to simply provide a way to incentivize people to work on and build things on brownfields and reclaimed coal fields. Probably a lot of you have heard about the disputes over solar panel arrays. That's in the guidance memo on pages 41 to 42. This little picture here was because for some reason people keep having a difficult time with understanding the difference between pervious, and I showed a farm, but obviously the buildings are impervious. That does tie into our other definition. Unconnected impervious, where the water is flowing in it and not connected by any conveyance system. It's just sheet flowing off the, in this case, a solar panel onto the ground where sheet flows some more, or connected impervious like in downtown Richmond. That's a view from my office. I got some prettier ways to look from my office windows too. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because of the numerous flooding complaints and erosion control complaints from solar sites where before they get fully vegetated and we're having an increase of runoff. And the picture in the bottom left, for example, is a solar array where the panels are all up, but most of the ground is still denuded. And that is the worst case design condition that you have to design for. It's just simply, eventually when it gets revegetated, the runoff will be a lot less. Now, if people, you do get credit for that sheet flow in unconnected impervious, there's multiple ways to do that, but there is definitely a difference in the runoff characteristics. The runoff characteristics could be improved a lot by decompaction, by leaving the topsoil on top, by putting the topsoil on top, or using newer tracking devices. For example, these are all one-way trackers, one axle, some are two axle. And in the north, in New England, you'll see two axle, which have way less runoff problems, but these are single axle trackers. And the newer trackers now can supposedly handle grade changes up to 17%, at least one brand. So the more flexibility we have in trackers, the more we can follow the undulations of the topography, the less cut and fill will ever be needed, and the less stormwater management impact. So we do address all this in this guidance, trying to prevent downstream property owners from being damaged by these projects. We want to encourage solar. We just don't want it to impact people downstream. We also have to deal with the fact that the Chesapeake Bay program is counting these panels as impervious cover. One thing we have done is we've offered an option. If you have rain sensors and you can rotate these panels, you only have to deal with the horizontal projected area of the panel, not the total size of the panel when it comes to impervious cover. Okay, streamlined checker plan review. I should have looked ahead. I already talked all through this. I apologize. I think this is a total repeat of what I've already said. For people that are interested in the classes, it's $1,434 in fees. You take 6 classes. I was just curious to see how many people are certified in different, different positions. So there's a lot in local government. That's the 272. I assume it's mostly local governments, but there's already 120 in the private world. 26 are unidentified. We don't know exactly where they work, but I would think that people would start encouraging people to get certified, to take these classes, learn more about what we're requiring, so they can have a more streamlined process, review process. And boy, I'm embarrassed. I should have just flipped ahead with these slides. I knew what I was going to talk about. So again, this is our goal, March 23 of 2023, to have the new stormwater E&S control regs consolidated. Okay, I finished a little early, a few minutes early, and I'm wide open for questions. Elizabeth.
Great. I think Ross is from Wetlands Watch. Ross Weaver is going to handle the questions that came in through Q&A. I did notice in the chat that someone asked if you could please provide more detail about stormwater changes to guidance for farms and agribusiness.
Sure. So one of the first bunch of complaints I dealt with the first week I was on this job was actually about a winery being built and a brewery being built, and without stormwater management. So there's been a big question as to should or do agribusinesses need to provide stormwater management and erosion control for that matter. So going back in the late 80s, there's a whole series of decisions and manuals that reference what activities and agricultural activities are exempt and which ones aren't. And what it appears is that it's not being interpreted consistently across the state. And I personally play gentleman farmer. My farm is partly in 2 counties. And I know when I was building a road and a bridge, and a barn and a shed, the county did not want to review any plans. But DEQ was telling me I should have a plan. So I prepared a plan, but no one wanted to review it. When I built a little house at the end of this mile-long road I built on my farm, then I had to do an erosion control and stormwater plan for my 1,800 square foot footprint house. Forget the big barn and the big shed, which were all much bigger. So it was an interesting experience personally. What I'm finding out is that there is guidance that suggests that even though a barn, for example, is exempt from a building permit, it's not exempt in some people's interpretations from stormwater management requirements or erosion control, nor is the road built to get to it. But if you're building just a farm road to go between fields, that's exempt. You can disc and plow and disturb the land for farming. You can do, grading for terracing. So certain farming activities are exempt. Building facilities is not necessarily exempt from these rules, depending on which county you're in and which part of DEQ you talk to and which part of VDAX you talk to. So we've had a joint meeting. When I say joint meeting, it's the secretaries of the Ag and Natural Resources and several departments. And we've just discussed in general what to do. And similar forestry is involved as well, because there's a lot of forestry issues, for example, that are related, that if you harvest the timber and your intent was to then build, say, a building or build a solar farm or do something like that, that is not allowed. But if you just harvest the same timber and don't have the intent to do anything later except let it naturally revegetate, that is allowed. Which I can argue both ways. It's still the removal of the timber occurred no matter what. And then you could, if you got your erosion control plan or your stormwater plan approved, you could then harvest the timber. But for that interim period of process the plan, you're not allowed to. So there's just these weird things. So we're trying to get a handle as, okay, what's all the previous guidance that's out there? Some of it's in the form of frequently asked questions, and we're finding they're not consistent. What did other counties do? It's not consistent. And then grappling, but again, because of staff time, we haven't figured out a proposal yet. And then the idea is to brief both secretaries, get their buy-in, then meet all different industry and stakeholder groups, casually at first, before we come out with a formal guidance document. But I would like to, I'd like to come to some resolution, because it's about 80% of all the complaints that I get at DEQ are related to stormwater. Believe it or not, I mean, it's crazy. We do. I mean, you'd think like Bristol landfill would get a lot more complaints. I don't know. To me, I mean, I got a couple of complaints. I get some complaints there, but the magnitude, I don't even think Reggie would show up on the graph if I graphed stormwater, complaints. So it just touches so many people that we've got to get a handle on how to do it. One thought is maybe there's a kind of like in the rural areas, a presumptive threshold that, as the farmers are saying, if you build a new shed on a 200-acre farm, you're like at 0.00x% of the site. How is that affecting anything? So there might be a threshold where we just don't worry about certain structures. So we haven't figured out the answer. If anyone has suggestions, we'll, obviously we haven't put much pen to paper yet, and we'd be more than willing to listen.
Excellent. We've got another question coming in from Anducci Ortiz, who asked how DEQ is handling forestry mulching. They've been told that isn't a land disturbance. It becomes more common for clearing land.
Well, that's an interesting one, forestry mulching. Yeah, someone asked me that recently, actually. That is going to be in that guidance because, again, historically, that's one that has not been considered a land disturbing practice in terms of you're not grading the land. So they have these amazingly big machines nowadays that, you know, that fit on a track hoe, for example, or a bobcat, that basically grind up and mulch all this smaller trees. I've seen one that goes up to, I think, 10 or 12 inch diameter trees. So it's like amazing, you know, big. And it just, in the end, there's just mulch on the ground. I've seen it used primarily two ways. One is people don't like undergrowth, and they then just leave the really big trees. It looks pretty, looks like a park, except for the fact now you have no age class distribution. So long term, it's not so good for the forest. But it's a visual thing that some people like. The other, I've seen it a lot where they're converting, like in Loudoun County. I've seen it being used Fauquier as well, where people are trying to convert forests to horse fields. And so they're making pasture. And the first step is to just get rid of all these trees and just create, you know, grind it up into a mulch. And then they overseed it. And it looks, usually in 2 or 3 years, all that mulch is kind of decomposed into organic material, and they've got a nice pasture. Is that, you know, so is that land disturbance or not? So far, most people saying it's not land disturbance. It's also done, of course, sometimes as a precursor to some type of development activity. But where I've seen it used intensively has been in, where I've seen it personally used intensively is converting to pasture.
Excellent. Thank you for that. One more comment that's come up, just that preliminary consultation conversations can really take a lot of the pain out of the review process, making sure applicants are on the same page and the process can go a little smoother. I think that's a great point, and definitely the case.
And DEQ historically has always recommended pre-application meetings. I do know, and you know, with COVID, there was a lack of face-to-face ones. It was more obviously, you know, virtual. But then just staff, you know, there's been a couple of things. There's been, you know, staff shortages that we're trying to do our best to hire people. So when you're like in Stormwater plan review, they had 9 reviewers with a funding for 21. That's hard to, which they're just stressed for time. And then I personally did a very large pre-app meeting with staff. I attended at the request of the permit, the applicant, I guess, who went to some very high levels above me that demanded I be there. And I had 2 questions. They've never had the courtesy to respond to the questions 3 months later, and now they're trying to have a pre-app with my staff and not see me. And so I've, you know, politely just informed them that when they answer the questions from the pre-app, they can have another meeting, but they can't. You're wasting our time unless you answer these questions. And they didn't like the questions, I guess. I don't know. I have no idea. But they didn't realize they were supposed to answer my question. That was one of the responses I got. And so when you have a pre-app, it's not going to be productive unless you actually do something. And I'm hearing that the staff they were overjoyed at my response because they said that happens to them all the time. So it's a two-way street. I'm trying to make everyone accountable in the process, because I think everyone has the same goal, but I want to stop the beating up of each other and make it a team play.
Absolutely. Cool. So we got another question that just came in. Is DEQ looking at a maximum amount of land disturbance in acres in the phasing of large scale solar projects?
No. That could be. Now, I say no. I mean, there is a stakeholder groups, House Bill 206 that DEQ is running. UVA, we've contracted them to handle the facilitation, and they're, you know, that's related directly to prime farmland and forest land. So that could be something that comes out of that group, but we're not on our own initiative proposing anything.
Mike, can we circle back quickly? Because I don't see another question, Ross, in the Q&A. So I'm going to take the moderator's privilege and ask you one.
Sure.
Going back to the theme here of trying to look at potential climate change impacts and how we're responding to them and what are we expecting with risks. You mentioned the updated IDF curve, and I don't know if you wanted to explain a little more about how DEQ sees your ability to respond to that type of situation. At the last lunchtime webinar, just FYI, Ross covered how Virginia Beach went back and pulled 70 years worth of precipitation data from the Norfolk Airport and therefore revised their design manual in response to that. So at the state level, how do you see responding to that? I know there was also, in the past, there were two different reports the DEQ did, reports to the General Assembly about the use of BMPs in high water table areas.
Right.
And that's something we see more and more of. So we leave it open-ended for you to touch on that.
Sure. So number one, DEQ splitting the cost. It started last year actually with VDOT to update the Atlas 14 storm intensities. So we're paying $285,000 roughly. So is VDOT. So we've made the first payment. We owe the second payment soon. So hopefully there'll be a statewide report out that gives us updated rainfall intensity data. So that's the first way. The second is in the manual, the stormwater manual, we're going to have a section that talks about this. And the idea is to be able to, as you update intensity curves, that it automatically goes into our design standards. So that I think is the simplest way to do it. We are not preventing people from managing and designing to larger storm events. Right now, we're not, the tools are there. You can substitute the 10, the 15, 100, whatever storm in the same calculations. That's not going to change. We don't have the regulatory authority, it appears right now, to change. Are we going to go from a 10 to 100? But the scientific data shows from this new study that it should be 7.9 inches over 24 hours versus 8.3, whatever the numbers are. Those can be, that's a technical process that just can happen. Right now what we're trying to do is only we're trying to improve our processes under current regulations. We're not, so to go to a higher storm event, that's a whole different level of problem or process.
Right. And what about, so this is the intensity of storm events, duration, frequency. What about sea level rise in general? Is that something that the agency has started to look at?
It is not something we've started to look at. That is a DCR assignment right now, not DEQ assignment. So I'm letting them do it.
Got it. Right. That's interesting just because there is, of course, a lot of NOAA data out there. We have that long-term record, the tide gauge at the Norfolk, the Naval Pier. So it'll be interesting to see how the agencies decide to incorporate that. Right. Ross, did you have any other questions or did members of the audience?
I don't, nothing else has popped up. We'll give folks maybe just another minute to see if there's any kind of late questions that pop up, but
they all fell asleep then maybe.
There's one that just popped up, Ross, about.
Excellent. Let's see here. Do you have a link that you can share for certain GIS stormwater mapping, or is much of that infrastructure too confidential? Any maps would be interesting as well.
What do you mean by GIS? I mean,
so certain GIS stormwater mapping. Mary Bird, I don't know if you'd like to elaborate on that, or if that would be maybe related to some of those initial kind of database that you presented on at the beginning of the webinar. I'll let Mary Bird maybe elaborate on that.
Mary, if you're comfortable, I can unmute you. Let me.
She noted that she worked with stormwater mapping at a county level. There we go.
You are still unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I worked for 9 years. I worked for over 27 years in county engineers, county zoning, and then around 9 years in stormwater. And I was out literally playing in the streets, trying to collect and go back in time to map old infrastructure for stormwater. And of course, this is urban environment, but I love maps, and I just wanted to add whether it was a recommendation or request, question, or such, that if you have maps to show how you're tracking some of a lot of it, great information you've already gone over.
Good question. So unfortunately, no. I mean, so I used to have a GIS department in my old company, but like we worked a lot with Northern Virginia counties, where every county has an amazing GIS system. Every storm drain is I mean, everything. It's amazing what they have. DEQ is, you know, how I say this, they only regulate or review stormwater plans for localities that decided not to do it themselves. It's primarily rural areas. And what I'm still trying to get Wi-Fi in my office and get I'm dead serious. I'm trying to get a screen in the conference room. So when I go in a couple of minutes to a meeting, we have no ability to hook our computer up to anything on the wall to look at together. Can't have. So we are still having a problem having people work in our offices with bandwidth. And I've been 7 months trying to, I ordered that screen in the end of January. And I'm told now tomorrow or Wednesday, they're going to start installing it. But I mean, it's every month they tell me 4 to 8 weeks since January. So I wish we could do what you're talking about, but right now we don't have, I mean, we're not even close. I just got more memory for all the plan reviewers so they could actually load some of those large solar sites on their computer and review the PDFs. They couldn't even do that. I'm sorry.
No, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah,
Good luck.
your conference room is difficult, Mike, because you can't, like, as an outsider who comes into meetings, you can't log on to the internet, and it's very, very secure.
Where you laugh, I asked for internet. They got a Wi-Fi. They got me a Wi-Fi. I said for the office. I didn't mean my office. I meant the freaking office. So there is Wi-Fi in one corner of one floor of this building right now, but it doesn't reach to the big conference room. Yeah.
So maybe we could end on, is there another?
Yeah, looks like we've got one.
There's one from Ann.
With respect to that, will DEQ be willing to share that program with localities that do their own permitting? Looks really great for the process improvements and accountability. They have a checklist, but it would be great to map the process like you showed.
No one's ever asked for that, but I'm sure we will. I mean, I do know that at the state level, they want to now, like, we're one program running and 3 in the queue that we're working on. I want to get to all 17, but I know they want to expand it now. The administration does to other agencies in the state. There's no reason why it can't be. It's not a proprietary. It's simply, I think the interface is called Tableau. It happens to be a software product we already owned. I just had to pay an extra fee to let the public look at it.
So maybe we could end with a question, nice big broad one. What do you see as your biggest challenge and biggest opportunity this coming year? What's left of it, or maybe even this legislative session?
Well, the biggest challenge is the budget and having funding for, having funding for more people and good people. It's just incredibly difficult to give people raises and reward them. And I just think they're underpaid and a lot of people. And we need to improve that. That's probably the biggest challenge. The biggest opportunity is just simply getting PEEP running, and the best thing about PEEP is simply the process of trying to make a schedule where you're mapping out the tasks. And we're having an incredible victory, I think, in process with the Army Corps, for example, where on mitigation, that things are taking 4 years or an average to get banks approved. There's a shortage. It's holding up public works projects in many counties. I did the first one ever in the state in 1991. It took me 3 years. I had to go to the Assistant Secretary of the Army. That only took 3 years. And so the fact it's taking 4 and 5 years now, when we have a couple hundred of them, I got it down to a 6-month process. Then the federal law, federal regulation was published in 2008. that set up a year standard, and ever since then, it's taken 2, 3, 4, but now sometimes 5 years. So we're working with an MOA with the Corps, and we hope to get it signed hopefully by the end of the year that divides and conquers. So we, instead of overlapping both of our staff, we're all going to trust each other and pick tasks. You do this at DEQ, you do that at the Corps. Everyone has assigned timeframes. And with that, I think we can cut that process down to a year or less. And it's a staff multiplier. You know, we both can dedicate 2 staff. That means we have 4 people now doing the work instead of 2, because then they were duplicating all their work. So to me, that's like that type of activity is probably the biggest opportunity. The second biggest is becoming more of a training and standard setting entity, like I'm trying to do in the Streamlined Stormwater, where we just don't have the resources, we don't have the people, and we're not getting the money. So let's change our focus and tell people what should be done, help train people to do that. And that way we can multiply our knowledge, you know, force multiply instead of trying to do everything.
Very pragmatic. Well, thank you again for coming and joining us today. We know how busy you are and we really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. I think we're going to close maybe with Ross. Did you want to say a little something about the series? But thank you, Mike. We know you have
I'm going to run because I got a 1 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Mike. Yeah, just in closing, so thanks everyone for coming out today. We certainly appreciate it. This is the second, as Elizabeth mentioned, the second in a series of resiliency webinars we've been doing. For next month, we're planning on looking at housing impacts. So things like looking at the kind of formerly redline communities, vulnerability to flooding. I think we'll have Professor Johnny Flynn from Christopher Newport University providing a presentation on that. But if anyone's interested in talking about kind of the different themes we have coming up, or if anyone has sort of an exemplary case study they'd like to share during the series, we'd love to get in touch with you. We'd love to hear about innovative financing mechanisms, sort of whatever resiliency best practices that you all would like to share. So I'll put my email address into the chat box, and if anyone would like just to reach out to me. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, hosts and panelists, I'm not sure if I can actually send a chat directly to the whole group, but my email address is just ross.weaver@wetlandswatch.org. So please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you participate in these sessions. We think it's important to have that locality perspective as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ross. And I failed to mention earlier, this initial idea came from the Virginia Environmental Endowment, and we really appreciate their executive director raising the need for climate change training in the state of all different kinds. And so this was the fruit of that discussion. So we thank them for that as well. And as Ross said, we really would like to couple big topics with local examples of success and how you made it work. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I will be sending out your email, both of your emails in the follow-up email to all attendees as well, with the link to the recording if you want to go back and in case you missed anything. Thank you all for joining.